On June 12, 2016, Ava Jensen arrived at Pine Bridge Summer Camp in northern Minnesota with a pink duffel bag, a water bottle covered in stickers, and her name stitched into every sock. She was 12 years old, quiet but not withdrawn, and she'd begged her parents for months to let her go. The camp was well reviewed, situated between two wooded hills and nestled along the curved edge of Lake Grisham. That first day passed without incident. She was assigned to Cabin C with 6 other girls, all around her age. They ate dinner in the mess hall, decorated name tags, and joined the others for flashlight tag in the open clearing after sunset. Staff reported seeing Ava during the game, laughing, a flashlight beam sweeping past her feet near the tree line. By 9:45 p.m., she was accounted for at evening check-in. By 10:30, she was gone. The initial response from staff was passive. Counselors assumed she'd fallen asleep in the wrong bunk or wandered off to the restroom. A head count was done quietly, without waking the other cabins. But by 11:10 p.m., her sleeping bag was still neatly folded, untouched. Her duffel hadn't been opened. The counselor knocked on the bathroom door. Nothing. Ava's flashlight was missing. That's when they notified the camp director. A soft search of the campgrounds began around 11:30. They swept the dining hall, the parking lot, the edge of the forest trails. No one wanted to say the word missing, not yet. At 12:07 a.m., staff called the local sheriff's office. By 12:45, deputies arrived and launched a formal search. Thermal drones were grounded due to light fog, but helicopters were dispatched by 2 a.m. A dozen flashlights bobbed through the dark woods. Campers were kept asleep. Ava's parents weren't notified until nearly 3 a.m., and by the time they made the 3-hour drive from Duluth, it was almost morning. They arrived to the sound of barking dogs and officers yelling coordinates over radios. But there were no screams, no calls for Ava, only methodical professional silence, as if whatever had happened to their daughter had already passed. They were searching for aftermath. By sunrise, the only clue emerged: Ava's flashlight. It was found lying in the damp grass near the lake's south edge, less than 40 yards from the dock. The batteries were dead. The lens was cracked. There were no footprints, no torn clothing, no signs of struggle, just the flashlight, alone. Divers were called in by 8 a.m. and began their sweep of the lake in a slow, grid-like pattern. Nothing turned up. The lake bed was silty, dark, hard to scan. Sonar was requested. Ava's parents sat on a bench just beyond the caution tape, watching the rippling surface, waiting for it to give something back. Meanwhile, the campgrounds became a closed scene. All 127 campers were interviewed. Most had no idea anyone was missing until breakfast was served without music. The 6 girls in Cabin C were questioned privately. One said she thought Ava had gone to brush her teeth. Another claimed she saw Ava pacing by the window around 10:15. One girl, the counselor noted, didn't speak at all. They all agreed on one thing: Ava hadn't been in her bed when lights went out. No one saw her leave the cabin, but no one saw her stay either. Investigators quickly realized the terrain complicated everything. The camp sat at the edge of 200 acres of forest. Deer trails, old maintenance paths, and overgrown logging roads crisscrossed the woods. The lake itself spanned 18 acres, irregular in shape, with dozens of rock formations and steep underwater drop-offs. If Ava had wandered into the water, she could be anywhere. But if someone took her, they would have had to move fast, and they would have had to know where they were going. Speculation crept in as hours turned to days. Some believed she ran away, though no one could say why. Others whispered about the water, that it pulled. Her parents rejected both theories. Ava wasn't impulsive. She wasn't the kind to wander or vanish for attention. She'd just written a letter to her grandma about how excited she was to try archery. Her shoes were still under the bunk. On day 3, local media arrived. Cameras panned over the still lake, the canoes stacked upside down, the yellow tape fluttering near the dock. A photo of Ava, soft brown hair, green t-shirt, slight overbite, was shown between weather reports and high school sports scores. Her mother gave a brief, trembling statement begging her daughter to come home. Her father didn't speak. He stared at the shoreline the entire time, like he was waiting for it to move. The camp closed the next day, 5 days ahead of schedule. Parents arrived in waves to collect their children, most of whom left confused, crying, or scared. The remaining staff helped pack up. Ava's cabin was cleaned out and sealed off. Deputies collected every lost sock and empty candy wrapper. Nothing useful. Just the echo of a girl who had been there and then wasn't. By the end of the week, the active search scaled back. Dive teams were reassigned. Volunteers went home. The posters started going up instead. On gas station windows, on diner doors, at interstate exits. The sheriff held a press conference and said they were pursuing all angles. But what those angles were, no one could explain. There was no suspect, no timeline, no trace. Only a flashlight and a family that refused to leave. And yet, somewhere between what was searched and what was forgotten, something remained beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment or the right hand to bring it back up. For 6 days, the lake was the center of everything. It stretched wide and indifferent beyond the yellow caution tape, calm in the early summer heat, giving no hints about whether it had taken something or simply watched something get taken. From the first morning after Ava's disappearance, divers treated it like a crime scene, not a wilderness accident. They entered in slow pairs, roped together, fanning out from the dock where her flashlight had been found. They searched for her like she was waiting just beneath the surface, like she might still be caught on a branch or tangled in lakeweed. But every sweep came back empty. The lake floor was soft with silt and churned with decades of discarded camp history, sunglasses, rusted hooks, even an old shoe still laced. But no sleeping bag, no hair, no body. On day 2, they brought in side-scan sonar, hoping to map deeper anomalies. It showed strange shapes in the northern bend, long shadows, maybe tree trunks, but none matched a human profile. Drones buzzed low over the water's surface, but fog rolled in most mornings, thick enough to blur thermal imaging. One searcher said it felt like the lake was keeping a secret, swallowing more than just the things they were looking for. By the 3rd day, hope had thinned. The dive teams worked in silence now, mechanical, mapping zones and checking them off. They widened the search radius past the swimming area, past the drop-off where the floor fell steeply to 12 feet. A few began to wonder aloud, quietly, if they were wasting time. If Ava had ever entered the water at all. Her shoes were dry. Her flashlight, cracked but working, wasn't waterlogged. The surrounding rocks showed no scuff marks, no drag, no sign of panic. It was as if she had walked to the edge, looked out, and vanished backward into something else. Rumors began to spread. Parents from other cabins made phone calls to local media, suggesting the lake was only a distraction, that the real problem was the time it took staff to notice she was missing, that more than 2 hours passed before authorities were called, that in those hours a vehicle could have left the grounds unnoticed. Ava's cabin was in the far corner of the camp. The perimeter fence wasn't secure. One road ran down from the hills and opened toward the forest edge, unmonitored. If someone had come, if someone had waited, there would have been time. Sheriff's deputies quietly began canvassing nearby trailheads, forest access points, even neighboring campgrounds. No one recalled seeing a strange vehicle, but no one was really looking that night. The few campers still at Pine Bridge were asked not to talk to reporters, but whispers slipped out anyway. One girl from Cabin D told her mother she heard someone screaming in the woods. A boy claimed he saw a flashlight flicker out near the old maintenance shed. None of it could be confirmed. The forest was too loud, the lake too quiet. And Ava, if she had screamed, hadn't been heard by the people who mattered. By day 4, Ava's name was everywhere. Local news, Twitter threads, summer parent groups. A single photo was repeated over and over. Her camp ID picture, smiling in a green Pine Bridge t-shirt. The more people saw it, the more questions came. Why wasn't there a better check-in process? Why were the cabins supervised by teenagers who checked the security logs if there even were any? Why had no one noticed that a 12-year-old girl never climbed into bed? Ava's mother refused to leave. Her father stayed 2 nights before returning home to manage logistics, school notifications, missing person paperwork, phone calls to relatives, but her mother remained silent, seated on the same bench every morning by the dock. She never asked to go out with the dive team. She never called out her daughter's name. She just stared at the water like she was waiting for it to speak. Camp staff brought her food, which she barely touched, At night, she slept in the director's office. She asked one question over and over again. Did they know what direction Ava was facing when she vanished? The camp shut down on day 6. Parents arrived in convoys, hugging their kids harder than before, some crying before they even reached the gates. No one protested the early closure. Counselors packed up in silence. Trash was burned, bunks were stripped, cabin C remained untouched, roped off and locked. The sheriff made another statement to the press, vague but reassuring. We are exhausting all avenues of search and investigation, but everyone could hear what wasn't being said. By then, it was no longer clear whether the lake was the answer or a distraction, whether it had swallowed a child or just offered the perfect cover for something else. Investigators started looking harder at the camp's own employees, quietly pulling phone records, checking social media posts from that night, logging vehicle movements, though very few had been officially recorded. Ava Jensen had vanished, yes. But the silence from the lake, the absence of any evidence at all, was beginning to say something louder than anyone expected. It was starting to look like she hadn't fallen. She'd been taken, and someone had known exactly how to make it disappear. By the second week of Ava's disappearance, the search was no longer measured in acres of lake or miles of forest. It shifted inward, into the cabin where she last slept, into the words and silences of the 6 girls who were supposed to be her bunkmates. Cabin C, tucked into the northeastern corner of Pine Bridge, became the quietest place on site. Its windows remained shuttered. The counselor assigned to it, a 19-year-old college sophomore named Lena Marston, was placed on administrative leave. She hadn't heard anything, hadn't seen Ava leave. She claimed she'd fallen asleep by 10. She said the girls had been unusually quiet that night. Detectives began interviewing the girls one by one, with parents present, inside the sheriff's mobile command van parked beside the empty camp lodge. The conversations were short but revealing. One girl, Natalie R., admitted she was a sleepwalker and had been found outside once before, barefoot near the flagpole. She remembered nothing from the night Ava disappeared. Another, named Emily, was known to be a heavy sleeper. Her parents backed it up with medical records. She hadn't woken at all. One girl, Sophia M., refused to speak beyond a few whispered yes or no answers. And then there was Kelly R., the one who kept revising her timeline. First, she said she saw Ava go to the bathroom around 10. Then, she said Ava had been reading on her bunk. Then, she said she wasn't sure Ava was even there at all. It was clear something was being protected. Whether a lie, a mistake, or a memory no one wanted to admit having. Investigators widened their lens. They pulled archived social media posts from past campers, scraped Reddit threads, and found mentions of an unofficial Pine Bridge welcome dare dating back nearly 5 years. The rules were always the same. On the first night, new campers were told they had to complete a challenge alone to be part of the cabin. Sometimes it was sneaking a snack from the mess hall. Sometimes it was writing their name under the dock. Sometimes it was walking to the lake with a flashlight and leaving it there, then coming back in the dark. One parent mentioned the dare offhand during a follow-up interview, assuming it was harmless tradition. The investigators pressed further. Eventually, one girl, Olivia W., 11 years old, cracked. She told them what happened that night. After lights out, Kelly had whispered to the group that it was time to initiate Ava. They'd joked about it earlier at lunch. Ava had seemed unsure, but no one thought she'd actually go. They told her to bring her flashlight and leave it by the lake to prove she wasn't scared. Kelly had said it was just a joke, a camp thing. She swore everyone did it. No one followed her out. No one waited to see her come back. The counselor, Lena, denied knowing anything about the dare. She admitted she'd heard the phrase before, but assumed it was just talk. She had been in charge of over a dozen girls. It was her first summer. She hadn't even checked the bunks with a flashlight. She assumed they were asleep. When asked why Ava's parents were never told about the dare, Lena said she didn't know it happened. When asked again later, her answer changed. She said the camp director had told her not to speculate about unverified peer behavior. It could hurt the case, he'd said. It could hurt the camp. No formal charges were filed. The girls were too young. The counselor hadn't knowingly encouraged it. There was no provable connection between the dare and Ava's disappearance, only implication. The file remained open, but something shifted in the way Ava's name was spoken afterward. It was no longer just about a girl who vanished. It was about a night that everyone agreed to pretend ended normally, about a ritual that no one claimed to have invented, but all had participated in. The flashlight at the lake suddenly meant something more. It hadn't been dropped. It had been placed. On purpose. And Ava had done it, thinking it would earn her a place. The girls from Cabin C were eventually sent home. Most were kept out of school for the rest of the summer. 2 were withdrawn entirely and moved to different states by the fall. Kelly R. deleted all her social accounts. No apology was issued, no statements made. The camp quietly updated its policies the following year, requiring nightly bunk checks and written records of counselor presence. But the policy changes didn't undo what had happened. Ava's parents were never told about the dare, not directly. They heard pieces of it from friends, from whispers in town, from the way one detective looked at the ground when they asked why their daughter went to the lake alone. And in that silence, held by 6 girls who were too young to be punished and too old to forget, was the answer no one wanted to say out loud. Ava had gone into the dark not because she was lost, but because she believed someone would be proud of her for doing it, because she thought the others were waiting, because someone told her she had to. By mid-July, less than a month after Ava Jensen vanished, the official investigation was already competing with something bigger: speculation. It spread online, across local Facebook groups, in cryptic Reddit threads titled Cabin C Case and Camp Blood, The Real Story. Commenters traded rumors like evidence. Screenshots of blurry aerial maps were posted with circles drawn around the lake's bends. Someone claimed the camp was built on top of an old logging settlement where children once went missing in the 1920s. Another said they'd stayed at Pine Bridge in the 90s and remembered the girl in Cabin B who slit her wrists with a mirror shard. None of it could be verified. But the longer Ava stayed missing, the more people needed something to believe in, especially something that didn't require admitting what might be closer to the truth. The sheriff's office created a tip line and got flooded. Some calls were anonymous, others gave names. Most were either completely false or impossible to verify. A few were detailed enough to merit follow-up. One woman claimed she saw a strange man near the staff cabins on the night of June 12th, carrying what looked like a rolled-up sleeping bag. She couldn't describe his face, only that he wore a maintenance shirt. That led investigators to revisit Pine Bridge's employee history, where they found something unexpected. 3 months before Ava's disappearance, the camp had quietly dismissed a part-time groundskeeper named Mitch Carver. He'd only worked weekends during preseason prep, but had keys to the tool shed and limited access to camper areas. He left after a reported verbal altercation with the director over drinking on site. No police report had been filed. When deputies tracked Carver down, he was living 2 towns over, alone, working at a salvage yard. He denied everything. Said he hadn't been near the camp since April. Said he barely remembered the girl. But his history raised concern. He'd served a suspended sentence in 2002 for assault and again in 2009 for possession of illegal weapons. His name lit up in true crime forums immediately. Online sleuths began pulling his background, posting grainy photos from an old high school yearbook and suggesting he was responsible for other local disappearances. But nothing connected him to Ava. He had no vehicle registered in his name at the time, no confirmed sightings, no DNA. His alibi, though weak, held. And eventually, like everything else, he was crossed off the list. That didn't stop the story from sticking. By the end of the year, several online threads referred to Ava's disappearance simply as the groundskeeper case. Then there were the drownings. Lake Grisham had always had a reputation, even before the camp. Longtime residents of the area remembered at least 2 incidents where swimmers vanished and were never recovered. The first, in 1971, involved a teenage boy believed to have drowned while diving from the rocks, though his body was never found. The second, in 1986, was a counselor who allegedly walked into the water fully clothed and was never seen again. Both events were marked in local archives, but no hard link to Pine Bridge or foul play was ever made. Still, people talked. Former campers emailed the sheriff's office claiming they'd experienced episodes of sleepwalking down to the lake. One woman said she woke up as a child to find herself ankle deep in the water with no memory of how she got there. Another claimed her friend had witnessed a figure in the woods that matched Ava's description, 6 years before Ava was even born. These stories didn't fit any pattern. They couldn't be investigated in a meaningful way, but they kept coming. In 1993, a girl named Lindsay H. had reportedly harmed herself in Cabin B. That much was true. The camp's internal records confirmed an ambulance had been called during that summer. The cause was listed as a mental health crisis. Lindsay had been taken to the local hospital and released to her parents. No police report was filed. Online, however, the story became something else entirely. People said she'd been possessed, that she carved the word under into her arm before going silent for a year. Again, no evidence supported this, but the incident resurfaced in every online theory about Ava. The idea that the lake, or the camp, held something darker than just bad management was too tempting to ignore. Investigators continued following credible leads, but all trails ran dry. No evidence from the lake, no fibers, no fingerprints, no signs of Ava past her flashlight. Her name was logged in the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database, but with no new tips by the end of the year, her case was moved to inactive status. Not closed, just waiting. Her parents were updated monthly by phone. Most calls lasted under 3 minutes, just enough time to say nothing new. The wall in the sheriff's station still held her flyer. It faded gradually under the overhead lights, pinned beside half a dozen other faces from the last 10 years. It was the same photo they always used, Ava in her green pine bridge shirt, a slight smile on her lips, the wind just starting to pull her hair sideways. No newer photo existed. Her belongings had long been returned, the cabin scrubbed clean, the lake frozen over. No one called about her anymore. And yet, the forums never stopped. Every summer, new posts appeared, parents warning parents. A local podcast devoted an episode to Camp Blood. A few teenagers from a nearby town even broke into the old campgrounds in 2019, filming videos for clicks and daring each other to sleep in Cabin C. They found nothing, but the footage circulated anyway. Then, in early August 2023, 7 years to the month since Ava vanished, an old man fishing on the southern bend of Lake Grisham snagged something beneath the surface. Not a fish, not a log. It was fabric, worn, tangled, heavy. And when he pulled it up, what surfaced was not a rumor, not a ghost story, not a memory. What surfaced was real. On August 9, 2023, just after sunrise, 71-year-old Gerald Baines launched his aluminum fishing boat into the southern cove of Lake Grisham. He'd fished the lake for over 40 years, mostly alone, mostly in silence, and always near the same bend where the birch trees arched low over the water. The lake had a reputation, he knew that, but he never paid it much mind. The fish still bit, and that was all that mattered. That morning, the mist clung low. The water was glass. He dropped his line and waited. An hour passed before he felt the pull. At first he assumed it was a snag, a log maybe, but then it shifted slow and heavy with a strange give. He tugged again. It came up grudgingly, tangled in weeds. When it broke the surface, he saw cloth, pale, greenish, mottled with algae and rot. It looked like an old blanket or tarp, but as he pulled it closer, something else appeared. Hair. Long, dark, matted with lake silt, then the edge of a jaw. Bone. He froze. The bundle collapsed into his boat with a wet thud, and something rolled free. A molar. Yellowed, small, unmistakably human. He didn't touch anything else. He didn't move. He called 911 with shaking hands and gave his location. The operator asked if he was sure it wasn't an animal. He didn't answer. By 11:20 a.m., sheriff's deputies had taped off the shoreline. Gerald sat wrapped in a wool blanket in the back of an ambulance, answering quiet questions with one-word replies. He wasn't injured, just stunned. He told them he'd caught dozens of strange things over the years, rusted bicycles, empty coolers, once even a child's shoe, but never anything like this. He'd never imagined anything human would come up out of that water. The deputies believed him. There was no panic in his voice, only something colder, something like guilt for pulling the lake open. The recovery team arrived that afternoon. They kept the press at bay and cleared the water around the dock. A forensics tent went up. Photographs were taken before the bundle was moved. It wasn't just fabric. It was a sleeping bag. Standard size, synthetic lining, discolored beyond recognition. It had been knotted at both ends, tightly, and weighed down with two rusted metal stakes from what appeared to be an old tent set. Inside, curled inward and partially dissolved, were the skeletal remains of a child. The skull was intact but fragile. Several ribs had collapsed. One wrist was still bent unnaturally beneath the chest, almost as if in resistance. The hair was still connected in patches to the scalp, and embedded deep in the interior lining were short fingernail gouges, scratch marks. Identification couldn't happen immediately. The bones were fragile, water-worn, likely degraded from years of submersion, but the location matched what no one had said aloud in years. This was the same bend where Ava Jensen's flashlight had once been found. Same depth, same shoreline. 7 years ago, the sonar sweep had extended into this cove, but stopped just 30 feet shy. The search logs confirmed it. Whether it was an oversight or coincidence, no one knew. But now, that margin mattered. This time, the lake had given something back. The next day, the sheriff's department held a press conference. They didn't confirm identity, but said the remains were consistent with a child between the ages of 10 and 13. A DNA test would take several more days. They asked the public not to speculate, but speculation came fast. News crews returned to the lake. Reporters revisited the camp's closed gates and the abandoned cabins visible through the trees. Former campers were interviewed again. Parents reposted Ava's photo. Her name trended for the first time in years. Her mother, still living in Duluth, was notified privately that same day. She didn't give a statement. She didn't come to the site. But she asked one question through her attorney. Was it a sleeping bag? The answer came within hours. Yes. It had been knotted from the outside. It had been zipped closed. Within 48 hours, forensic analysts confirmed the molar-matched dental records submitted in 2016. The remains were officially identified as Ava Jensen. The announcement was made by the sheriff, whose face had aged visibly since the early days of the case. He didn't take questions. He only said one thing that no one could forget, that based on decomposition, Ava had likely died not long after disappearing. But the cause of death was still undetermined. The bag itself had no visible signs of tearing. There were no bullet holes, no cords or restraints beyond the knotted ends. There was no clothing inside, except for what remained of a sock and a t-shirt tag. The absence of forensic evidence didn't end the case. It reopened it. Now, everything that had gone quiet had to be examined again. Every name, every story, every silence. The image that haunted investigators wasn't just the bones, it was the position. The way the body had folded inward, as if it hadn't been placed but had moved, as if the child had still been alive when the zipper closed, as if the lake hadn't taken her, but merely held her for 7 long years, until someone finally had the nerve to pull her back. The official confirmation came 79 hours after the remains surfaced. The dental comparison was straightforward. Ava Jensen's dental records had been submitted to the state database within days of her disappearance back in 2016, routine for child missing persons cases. Her orthodontist had charted her top left molar as unusually angled due to a delayed loss of her baby tooth. That same molar had fallen loose into Gerald Baines's fishing boat. The match was exact. 7 years after she walked away from Cabin C, Ava Jensen had finally come home, but the answers didn't come with her. The remains were too degraded for a traditional autopsy. Water had stripped tissue, loosened joints, and softened bone. But the forensic pathologist at the county coroner's office found something that made the team stop. A thin synthetic cord, plastic, colorless, and buried beneath algae buildup, was caught between the cervical vertebrae. It wasn't long, maybe 14 inches at most, but it looped in a perfect arc where the neck had once supported a head. Compression marks along the bone suggested force, steady and sustained. The angle didn't match accidental entanglement, it matched restraint. There were no ligature bruises, of course, no skin left to mark. But the position of the cord, its tension, and the way it dug into the space just below the base of the skull told a story no one was ready to hear. Whatever happened to Ava hadn't just been abandonment, it hadn't been panic. It was controlled. Someone had closed the bag from the outside, and someone had tightened that cord. The sleeping bag itself was examined forensically. It had once been dark blue, probably part of the camp's standard issue from years prior. The outer shell was intact except for a long tear along the foot, likely from natural erosion. The zipper was still functional, though stiff from rust. It was fully closed, the teeth aligned. The pull tab rested on the outside. And inside, pressed deep into the lining, were 6 parallel grooves, short, uneven, clawed into the fabric. Nail scratches. The implications moved quickly through the department, first in quiet meetings, then in formal reports. The scratches weren't accidental. They weren't from shifting bones or wildlife. They had depth, angle, and pattern. They suggested movement from within, and they were made by small hands. Ava had been alive when she went into the bag, or at least alive enough to try to get out. The sock found inside, still partially stretched around her foot, matched the Pine Bridge camp uniform from the summer of 2016. A faint green stripe ran up the side. The cotton had hardened over time, fossilized into something brittle, but the color held. There were no shoes, no underwear, no pants, no flashlight, just the shirt tag, unreadable now, and that one sock. The coroner wrote her findings with restraint. Cause of death, undetermined. Findings consistent with possible homicidal compression, indicators of confinement present. That's as far as she was willing to go. No bruising, no fingerprints, no foreign DNA. The lake had done its job well, preserving just enough to torment, but not enough to convict. But the sheriff's office made its own call. The case, long cold, was now classified as an active homicide investigation. There was no more room for theory. No more pretending this was a girl who got lost, fell, drowned. She'd been zipped into a sleeping bag, likely conscious, and placed in the lake with enough weight to keep her submerged for years. Someone had made sure she wouldn't be found. Someone had planned that. The timing of death couldn't be pinned down. Based on decomposition, she had died within hours or days of her disappearance, but not instantly. The scratches changed everything. So did the cord. This wasn't a simple panic or a cruel prank gone wrong. This was intention. Investigators reviewed every log, every interview, every timeline from 2016. They revisited Cabin C's counselor, Lena Marston, who now lived in Illinois and worked in early childhood education. She hadn't spoken publicly in years. When contacted, she declined to comment. They also reached out to the 6 girls from the cabin, now in their late teens. 3 responded through attorneys, 2 refused. 1 girl, name withheld, had moved to Oregon shortly after the disappearance. She had never given a second interview. That was about to change. Public reaction moved from grief to fury. Ava's name trended again, comment sections filled with the word murder. The podcast that had once covered the case in vague mystery tones now ran a 5-part series titled Zipped Inside. The sheriff's inbox filled with emails asking how this could have happened, why no one had told the parents about the dare, why the lake hadn't been searched more thoroughly, why no arrests had ever been made. And through all of it, Ava's mother stayed silent. Her attorney released a single sentence to the press. "My daughter did not drown, someone put her there." What made this discovery so unbearable wasn't just what they found. It was the order of things. Ava had gone into that bag alive. She had scratched, she had waited, and then the water sealed her. What remained now were just traces, plastic, bone, cloth, silence. But even silence leaves a shape. And now the investigation was starting to follow that shape. Someone had done this, and someone had stayed quiet for 7 years. By the 3rd week of the reopened investigation, the case files from 2016 were combed again, line by line, date by date. One name kept surfacing in footnotes but with an asterisk beside it, Melanie Brooke. Age 12 at the time. Cabin C. Initial statement given through a parent the day after Ava's disappearance, marked as cooperative, not re-interviewed. The last update on her file was dated July 7, 2016, less than 3 weeks after Ava vanished. According to school records, she'd been withdrawn from class that same week. By fall, the Brooks had moved out of state. No forwarding address was documented in the local system. Now, 7 years later, Melanie was 19. She went by her mother's maiden name, Melanie Shore, and lived in Oregon, registered as a college sophomore. A background check revealed the name change had been filed legally but quietly, without any public notation of safety concerns. There was no witness protection, no restraining order, no flagged status. Just a name erased and redrawn across state lines. That was enough to warrant a visit. 2 detectives flew to Oregon on August 17th. They approached Melanie outside her dorm building. She recognized them immediately. Her shoulders dropped. She didn't ask what this was about. She only asked if they'd spoken to Kelly yet. The interview took place in a campus security office. Melanie's hands shook. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't try to delay. She said she hadn't talked about the night Ava disappeared since she was 12. She thought about it all the time, but she'd convinced herself Ava had drowned on her own. Until the news broke last week. Until the sleeping bag. Until the cord. That had changed everything. She said it began as a joke. The initiation had been pushed by Kelly R., who claimed it was tradition. Ava was nervous, too quiet, too careful. She didn't want to sneak out, but she also didn't want to be the one who refused. The others teased her gently, nudging her along. The dare was simple. Leave your flashlight by the lake, touch the canoe, and come back. It was only supposed to take a few minutes. Melanie said they all watched Ava walk down the narrow slope behind the cabins, flashlight beam bouncing against the trees. They giggled. It felt harmless. Then Kelly whispered something. Let's scare her. She grabbed Ava's sleeping bag from her bunk and slipped out the cabin door barefoot. Melanie followed. She didn't know what Kelly planned. They reached the tree line just as Ava was crouching by the lake, placing the flashlight near the edge. Melanie said Ava looked nervous, like she was rushing. That's when Kelly shouted something, loud, sharp. Ava jumped. Kelly threw the rolled sleeping bag toward her hard, like a prank. It hit Ava square in the back. What happened next didn't look dramatic. Ava staggered forward, lost her footing on the slick rocks, and fell toward the water. Melanie swore she didn't hit her head, didn't scream. She just slipped and didn't get up. Her body landed strangely, legs twisted beneath her. She didn't float. She didn't call out. She didn't move. Melanie froze. Kelly walked to the water's edge and just stared. For a long time, no one said anything. Ava's flashlight flickered once and went out. Melanie said she wanted to run for help, but Kelly grabbed her arm and said it wasn't what it looked like, that Ava would get up, that they couldn't get in trouble over a dare, that if they said anything, they'd all be blamed. She told Melanie to go back to the cabin, to pretend it didn't happen, to trust her. Melanie obeyed. She crawled back into bed and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. She didn't hear Ava come back. In the morning, Kelly acted normal. By the time counselors realized Ava was missing, Kelly said nothing, and neither did she. 2 days later, Melanie's parents pulled her from the camp. They said nothing to law enforcement. A week after that, they sold their house and left the state. She didn't know why they'd moved so fast, but part of her believed Kelly had told someone something that made their family want to disappear before the truth caught up. Detectives took Melanie's statement in full. It aligned with several pieces already known: the lake, the flashlight, the lack of panic. But it also raised new questions. If Ava had only slipped, who zipped the bag, who tied the cord, and why had Kelly told her to stay quiet instead of call for help? When shown a photo of the sleeping bag, Melanie began to cry. It was Ava's. She recognized a patch on the edge that she'd sewn on herself, a pink butterfly. That patch had still been visible in the recovered remains. Ava had taken the sleeping bag with her when she went to the lake. Kelly must have followed her with it again. That part didn't make sense. Melanie swore she saw the bag thrown, but if Ava was zipped inside, it wasn't a prank anymore. Investigators thanked her. They didn't promise anything. They flew back that evening with a new name circled in red at the top of their file: Kelly R., the one who started the dare, the one who shouted, the one who never blinked when the others lied. Ava may have fallen by accident, but everything that happened after, someone had made sure she didn't come back up. The search warrant was executed quietly, without media alert, on a suburban street outside Milwaukee. Kelly R. still lived with her parents in the same house they moved into after leaving Pine Bridge. She was 19 now, working part-time at a craft supply store and attending a local community college. She'd never been questioned a second time after that summer, never reached out to Ava's family, never mentioned the camp again. But after Melanie's confession in Oregon, investigators returned to the girl whose name had been whispered beneath every version of the truth. The warrant covered all digital devices and any journals or personal writings from her time at camp. Most of the notebooks in her bedroom were blank or filled with shopping lists and casual sketches. But buried inside an old plastic bin beneath her bed, investigators found a soft-covered diary, pink, fraying at the edges, with faint initials drawn in glitter pen. It was labeled Summer 16. The first page was filled with camp packing lists, the second with doodles. But by the fifth entry, the tone changed. The handwriting became rushed, slanted, and the date was June 12th, the night Ava disappeared. The entry read, "Ava did it. She actually went. We dared her, and she went. Kelly said we had to. I was scared, but everyone was watching. When we zipped her in, she started freaking out. I thought she was kidding, but then she screamed. We told her to stop. It was just for a minute, just until we got back." The next lines trailed off, rewritten 3 times, the ink scratched through. But the meaning was clear. Kelly had admitted, in her own words, that Ava had been zipped into the sleeping bag alive, as a joke, and left by the dock, crying. There had been no accident, no panicked fall into the water. They had physically restrained her, walked away, and come back the next morning to find the bag gone. Another passage, dated June 14th, read, "They said she ran away. They said we'd get blamed. I didn't want to lie, but we all swore. We made the promise under the steps. If no one said anything, she'd come back and it would be over, like a prank. We didn't do anything bad. We were just trying to scare her. I didn't zip it all the way, I swear." But someone had. The zipper had been closed completely. The knots had been tight. The cord found around her neck vertebrae didn't appear in the journal, but guilt did, dripping between every line. Over the course of 24 pages, the tone shifted from denial to desperation. Kelly wrote about seeing Ava in her dreams, of hearing her name whispered in the sound of running water. She described the way the dock looked in the morning, empty, as if it had swallowed something. She never mentioned the plastic cord, but she mentioned Ava crying. She mentioned her trying to sit up, and she mentioned something else, something investigators hadn't expected. "I think someone else saw us when we were leaving. I heard something move near the canoe shed. It wasn't an animal. I thought it was a counselor, but no one said anything. If someone else found her, maybe they thought she was already." The sentence didn't finish. She'd drawn a heavy black line across it. The rest of the diary skipped forward in time. No direct mentions of Ava after July. But later pages held more ambiguous entries, one from January 2018. "The lake is frozen, but I still see her. Every time I close my eyes, I didn't kill her, I didn't kill her, I didn't kill her." And another, "From the spring of 2020, if she'd come back, everything would be okay. We said she would. We said it wasn't real. We said she was fine." Investigators cross-referenced the diary entries with Kelly's online activity over the past 7 years. Her posts had been sparse but erratic. She had deleted her Twitter account in 2019. Before that, she'd posted cryptic one-liners every June. "Don't go near the water. Wishing we could undo things. Is it worse to watch or to leave?" Her Facebook messages showed frequent unsent texts around the anniversary of the disappearance. Her browser history included searches like, "How long can bones stay underwater?" and "What happens if a body is zipped in fabric?" The evidence was circumstantial, but emotionally damning. When detectives confronted Kelly, she didn't deny the diary was hers. She didn't confirm it either. She asked for a lawyer and refused to answer further questions. Her parents, visibly shaken, released a short statement saying they had no knowledge of the entries and were devastated by the allegations. Forensic analysts dated the ink and paper. The journal was authentic. The entries were consistent with a child's voice, evolving into a teenager's regret, but none of it could prove who zipped the bag, who tied the cord, who placed the weights. The bag had no fingerprints, no DNA, no confession, just memories, etched in private pages and replayed in sleepless nights. Still, one thing was undeniable. Ava hadn't been left alone by accident. She'd been screaming, she'd been crying, and someone, at least one of them, had walked away anyway. They'd told themselves she would come back, that it was all just part of the dare. But the lake had waited, and the truth had soaked through everything. Now, the silence wasn't protecting them anymore. It was cracking, word by word, line by line. When Ava Jensen's remains were identified and the sleeping bag confirmed, investigators didn't just revisit witnesses, they re-examined the institution that had framed the first story. The staff at Pine Bridge Summer Camp had given statements in 2016. Most were short, sanitized, and consistent, but 7 years later, under renewed scrutiny and armed with a homicide classification, detectives found cracks. Small details were missing from original transcripts. Names that had once seemed peripheral now raised new questions. And one of them, Claire Fenn, a 17-year-old junior counselor that summer, finally told the truth. She had stayed silent all these years, working retail jobs, never contacted again after her initial interview. But now, sitting in a small office across from two investigators with copies of Kelly R.'s journal and autopsy photos of the sleeping bag, she said she couldn't keep it buried anymore. Her voice trembled when she spoke. The first thing she said was, "I didn't know it would become this. I didn't think it mattered." She said she had found the sleeping bag, not the police, not the dive team. Her. At dawn on June 13th, the morning after Ava disappeared, she'd been up early to prepare for cabin inspections, walking near the dock when she saw something that didn't belong. What looked like a rolled-up bag pressed into the reeds beside the lake. She walked closer and saw the name Ava J. still faintly written on the edge tag. The zipper was half open. No one was inside. She panicked, ran back and told her senior supervisor, Greg Hall. Greg, a 42-year-old former camp director with nearly a decade at Pine Bridge, didn't react the way she expected. He didn't call the sheriff. He didn't tell the parents. He pulled Claire aside and said the camp was under tremendous pressure, that if they said they found Ava's bag near the lake before the police got there, it would make them look negligent. He told her to say nothing until law enforcement arrived. Later that morning, she saw Greg walk toward the dock with the bag. When he came back, it was no longer in his hands. The flashlight, she now believed, hadn't been found the night Ava disappeared. She'd overheard two other counselors whisper that it had been dead when they placed it on the grass, that they'd cracked the lens themselves, thinking it would look more believable. They wanted the police to think Ava had gone to the water alone, dropped her light, and fallen. Claire never knew who gave the order, but she remembered the tone. Don't say anything. Don't guess. Don't speculate. Stick to the story. The original timeline, the one provided to Ava's parents and included in the missing persons bulletin, said the flashlight was discovered by searchers around midnight, that Ava's sleeping bag had been untouched in her bunk, that no counselor saw anything suspicious until after the alarm was raised. All of that now unraveled. Detectives re-interviewed Greg Hall. He denied any cover-up, said he didn't remember being told about a found sleeping bag. When shown Claire's statement, he paused and asked for a lawyer. Two other staffers confirmed under oath that Greg had directed them to protect the camp's name at all costs. One described the atmosphere in the lodge that morning as numb with fear, but not for the girl, for the business. Records showed that Pine Bridge had no liability insurance to cover a wrongful death at the time. It had faced financial strain the previous year and was on probation for prior safety violations, none of which had been disclosed to parents. A lawsuit would have bankrupted it. So they created a story that gave space for confusion. That leaned on the idea of a girl who wandered off, a flashlight that flickered out, a tragic accident in the woods, and they handed that version to law enforcement before the parents even arrived. When Ava's parents were told the truth, there was no press conference, just a letter from the sheriff's office and a private call with the lead investigator. Her mother didn't speak for most of it. Then she asked one question. Did they move her flashlight before they moved her body? The investigator answered yes. Her mother hung up. The Jensens reopened the civil suit they had originally filed in 2017, one that had quietly settled for a modest payout and a non-disclosure agreement. This time, with new statements and corroborated manipulation of evidence, the suit was aimed not just at Pine Bridge, but at the individuals involved. Subpoenas were issued, depositions scheduled. Several former staffers refused to testify. Others admitted the truth in brief, broken sentences. "We were scared," one said. "We didn't want to be the ones blamed." Pine Bridge Summer Camp never reopened. Its cabins were sold off at auction. The land sat abandoned and eventually overgrown. Local kids dared each other to sneak onto the grounds, take pictures near Cabin C, post them with hashtags like Yorkshire Ghost Girl and Cursed Camp. But no one played on the dock. Not anymore. In the town's memory, Ava Jensen had once walked alone toward the lake. But now it was known she wasn't alone. She had been seen. Her absence had been noticed, and the adults who should have protected her had chosen silence instead, to protect their reputations, to protect their budgets, to protect themselves, and that silence let a child's body sink deeper into a lake while the story above the water hardened like truth. 7 years after Ava Jensen vanished from Pine Bridge Summer Camp, her story returned to the place it had always belonged, the lake. On a quiet afternoon in late September, a small crowd gathered at the edge of Lake Grisham, where a new dock stretched over still water. At its end, bolted to the railing, a bronze plaque had been installed. Ava Jensen, 2004 to 2016, loved, remembered, silenced no more. Her mother stood in front of it with one hand on the metal, her eyes fixed on the water that had once taken everything. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The investigation had officially closed weeks earlier. The medical examiner's final ruling classified Ava's death as accidental manslaughter due to juvenile negligence and concealed evidence. No murder charges, no convictions. The children involved were underage at the time. Most statutes had expired. But the case's conclusion wasn't about legal punishment. It was about naming what had happened after so many years of silence. Ava hadn't drowned. She hadn't wandered off. She'd been zipped inside a sleeping bag while still alive and left by the lake. Someone had knotted the bag, someone had added the weights, and no one had come back. Kelly R., one of the girls from Cabin C, had been at the center of it all. Her diary, uncovered during a renewed investigation, described the night in chilling detail. How Ava had cried when they zipped her in, as a joke, how they walked away while she screamed, how they all agreed not to say a word. Kelly never admitted to tying the cord found around Ava's neck vertebrae, nor to placing the weights that held the bag under the surface. But her silence had lasted 7 years. In the end, she took a plea deal for obstruction of justice and was sentenced to community service. Her public statement was brief, careful, and ended with a single sentence: "I will carry this for the rest of my life." The revelations didn't end there. A junior counselor came forward and admitted she'd found Ava's sleeping bag early that morning, hours before police arrived. But she'd been told by the camp manager to stay quiet, to let the authorities find it on their own timeline. The flashlight found at the lake's edge had been placed there deliberately to support the theory of a nighttime accident. Ava's parents, once told she had likely drowned, now learned the truth. Her scene had been manipulated to protect reputations. And the people who could have helped had chosen self-preservation over honesty. The camp never reopened. Its land was sold, its buildings torn down, and its legacy reduced to court records and abandoned trails. But the lake remained, unchanged, holding in its quiet surface the weight of what had happened. For years it had given nothing back, no body, no answers, no closure. And then, with the pull of a fishing hook, it returned the truth. Not all of it, but enough. What the lake gave back wasn't just a child's remains. It gave back the silence everyone had tried to bury. The truth no one had spoken. The moment Ava was left, zipped up, unheard. The case may be closed, the timeline explained, the names documented. But for those who knew her, who failed her, or who waited for justice, the silence will linger longer than any sentence. And now, with the dock rebuilt and the plaque in place, the lake speaks in the only way it ever has. Quiet, heavy, unmoving, but no longer holding secrets.